Hey everyone, I'm stuck at work, and we're just gonna get right into it. So, this is a monster channel, okay? And that not only includes Pokemon and Digimon, but it also includes horror movies. And today, I want to talk about the FNAF movie.
Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria.
And I want to specifically talk about how I think the FNAF movie needs to ignore the games if it wants to succeed. Because I believe the movie itself was greenlit on a premise that the games no longer follow. Okay, let me break this down for you. For one, I've been really excited for the FNAF movie to show up since day one. I've always thought that this franchise had a great setup for a movie adaptation, because the one thing it's got going for it that other video games don't have is that the movie can serve a purpose that the games don't. Part of what made FNAF work beyond the novelty was how it trapped the player. The jump scares are the horror equivalent of popcorn, yes, but the actual tension the game builds up is like a full-course fucking meal. What's the famous Hitchcock quote? There is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. Like, right here, I'm about to get jump scared. I'm just not gonna tell you when. And the biggest holes in the game were actually the holes in the story. However, the lack of explanation also helped sell the atmosphere and build up suspense. As you can see, Hitchcock's policy is almost perfected in OG FNAF. The cool thing is that the anticipation of the scare is going to transfer over to the movie release anyway. However, the biggest saving grace of the film is that bitch is going to have to be structured. And that, my friends, was supposed to be what was going to make it appeal to so many different people. The movie was going to have to tell a more structured narrative. Because, you know, it's a movie. The problem now is that the story of the movie is actually different from the story of the games. And that's because after FNAF 1, the story changed. Yeah, you heard me right. I believe this movie got greenlit on a story that has been changed a bare minimum of at least 3 times. Yes, that was a pun. I said what I said. I know you guys like timelines, so let me plot this shit out for you like a scary vacation roadmap. And don't worry, the timeline is gonna die at the 4th entry. So our journey begins in 2014. Now you gotta understand, I wasn't a little kid when FNAF came out. This franchise didn't exactly shape my future, you know what I mean? Even then, when it first came out, FNAF was this weird indie title that pretty much any computer could play? And much like Dark Souls didn't give you all of this story up front, you had to piece it together. So it's no surprise just how big of a community-driven experience the game ended up becoming, especially the theory crafting. But I'm not gonna touch on every idea that was kicked around. I'm only gonna bring up the one video that matters, and that's, whether you like it or not, Game Theory's original Five Nights vid. Okay, I'm just gonna admit it, I'll die on the hill that MatPat was right about 95% of this video. Because we gotta look at the facts in both the game of Five Nights and the game of life. You see, Scott Cawthon was a failing game dev who worked as a cashier and was struggling with supporting his family. Scott's also a good old boy from Texas and very Christian. This point will matter later, I promise. So after reading a review about how his latest video game characters looked like scary animatronics, he threw down the gauntlet and said, "Let me show you what that really looks like." Now, I don't know this guy's age, but according to Wikipedia, he went to college in 1996, which tells me he would have been old enough for at least high school when the nationwide story about the Chuck E. Cheese shooting took place. And finally, if you look back at his previous games, he's already based some of them on other stories, as shown by the video game Pilgrim's Progress. Therefore, he's not exactly above using a previous event as a catalyst for his own creation. So I'm gonna say that with the success of Five Nights after this first entry, we got a bit of a Kingdom Hearts situation here. Much like FNAF, the first game of Kingdom Hearts is so different from the rest of the franchise that its exclusion actively makes the lore easier to follow the further down the road you get from it. And it's the same thing with FNAF. Scott wasn't banking on success, but literally 4 days after he released Vintage FNAF, The Let's Players blew it the fuck up. Now Scott has success on his hands, and what's the one thing people want more than a good scare? A good sequel. But just like Nomura with Kingdom Hearts, Scott told a pretty good story using only the one entry. A lot of people seem to forget that in a vacuum, original Flavor FNAF was an open and closed book. Just look at it. You are a guy who's hired to work the night shift, and the animatronics are haunted by dead kids. That's all. Golden Freddy, he's a spoopy ghost. That's it. In fact, I think the only thing MatPat was wrong about was that you were the killer. I think you're just a random dude that got hired, and the Bite of 87 was more like a framing device. These scary posters, it's literally just scary window dressing. It's not foreshadowing the puppet, because the puppet didn't exist yet. It's just like Freddy Krueger. You don't need to know how he got his powers. He was a child killer. The parents killed him. Now he haunts the kids in their dreams. Boom. Case closed. Instant classic oatmeal. Heat that shit up and enjoy. But now all of a sudden, this game is now a franchise and has some serious legs. So Scott needs to step everything up. And that brings me to the next point on the timeline. A whole ass 3 months later. Man, you got that shit out fast, Scott. Anyways, suddenly we've got more of everything. More animatronics, more gimmicks, more jump scares, and most importantly, more lore. Also, this game is hard as hell, and I'm not alone in believing that this time period was the absolute peak of FNAF as a franchise. You gotta understand, man, we didn't have names, we only had 2 dates, one of which came from a fucking pink slip, and there wasn't any silly bullshit like Remnant around. Now, there's a lot of well-warranted hate for FNAF, especially in regards to the story, but everyone seems to forget that at the release of these first 2 games, the series was legitimately compelling. And somehow Scott managed to pull something off that even Kingdom Hearts couldn't do, and forge a sequel that did not step on the toes of the previous entry in any way. FNAF 2 is a genuinely perfect follow-up because everything is still intact here. The best part comes into play when you realize it's a prequel. And just like Scott, I think MatPat stepped up too. And unlike last time, I think he 100% nailed it with his FNAF 2 theory. As far as I'm concerned, at this point, this is the story of the games. Keyword being, at this point. So now the franchise has had 2 entries within a year, and it is slowly becoming more and more mainstream. Now let's go to the penultimate stop on this timeline. March 2015 arrived, and with it, FNAF 3. And yeah, popular opinion is that this one out of the original set is by far the most mid. Even the Living Tombstone song was weak. Yeah, the third game kinda left everyone shrugging, even though it gave us the most conclusive information as to the series' backstory. We finally got to see the guy who killed the kids get his comeuppance in the form of dying in a spring-locked suit and then dying in a fire. Then literally the month after FNAF 3 drops, Warner Bros. Snatched that shit up and they started trying to get a movie off the ground. So starting right now, we're gonna disregard all of the theory videos because this is where we get enough blatant information in the game itself to close the narrative. And this is where details start to matter. As it stands, the series has come full circle. You have a first entry about a guy who is just at the wrong place at the wrong time. That being a night watchman at a pizzeria that happens to be haunted by the animatronics possessed by dead kids. Simple, easy classic. The sequel will then take place in the past, setting up the first movie and giving us the backstory as to how it all happened by showing us the kids dying and how the previous pizzeria shut down with the Bite of 87. Nice, clean, wonderful follow-up. Then the third and final part shows us what happened to the asshole who killed all of these kids to begin with. It's nice, it's simple, and it's satisfactory. So, you know, let's just fucking ruin it. Okay, it's time to flash forward another 3 months to where we not only got the first director attached to the movie, but also to the fourth and, according to the title, final chapter of the game series. So if you're good at following along, and considering you clicked on the FNAF video, there's a fairly solid chance you are, you may realize there's a whole 8-ass years that passed between the original announcement and the movie actually showing up.
Oh shit!
That's a lot of life between A and B. So, by the way, we have the hindsight that this title pulled a Friday the 13th, but let's get into the game itself. This time you're playing as a little kid, and plot twist, you get chomped by an animatronic thanks to your asshole brother sticking you in its mouth.
Holy shit, dude.
No possession, no ghosts, you're literally a victim of circumstance. It's just another bad accident. There's nothing magical about that, it's just a fucked up idea that set up all of this scary shit to happen. And, to quote Chords, that's kind of what makes these horror franchises so good.
There's this other bigger thing I miss from old school horror movies. It's this one element that Hollywood used to define the horror genre that has since been heavily buried by jump scares. And what I'm referring to is fucked up ideas.
And that's kind of the original beauty of FNAF. The more you explain that shit, the less and less you're putting it on that core idea. We don't need to know that he's trying to harvest some kind of energy. It's just a fucked up idea that kids were murdered and put into suits to hide their bodies. Anyways, back to FNAF 4 and its reception. So even though the fanbase as a whole got a little irritated by yet another release so quickly after the third, they were put at ease by the cool new lore and the gameplay improvements over the third game. We thought we were getting even more stuff shown to us and getting more and more pieces put together until this was found. So, yeah, it turns out the game takes place in 1983, and upon closer inspection, we might be dead. But thankfully, all the pieces still line up with the previous entries, and they're not stepping over each other, even with this revelatory new info. To cap it all off, there's a mysterious box that Scott plans on unlocking, and apparently, whatever's trapped inside is going to provide the missing context and framework for every lost link of the franchise, and finally bring it all together. So as I'm sure all of you are aware, Scott chose to keep that shit locked up. This is the moment where things take a huge turn, because according to Scott, this is the first game where the story wasn't figured out. December of 2015 is also the point in time where we get the first novel, which according to Scott himself, had been in production since February. Roughly right before he published the third game. So if you know anything about the books, you're probably aware they're really fucking weird and a bit of a mess. This is the point where the series begins to transition from the paranormal into science fiction, and we know from a later post in 2017, Scott has apparently retconned only one thing that he refuses to clarify. And I'm just gonna say, it was probably the whole fucking plot of the franchise. And with that being said, timeline officially over. I'm done talking about literally everything that shows up in the series after this point, because this is also when the movie goes into development hell. Scott Kaufman, at this point, has had final say on the script since day one, and it's more than a little sus that the year the series starts to change direction also happens to be the year things slow down with the film adaptation. It's my opinion that sometime after the third game, Scott decided he wanted to change directions with the path of the franchise and tried to rework his adjustments into the movie's story. Problem is, all this sci-fi nonsense, and it is straight nonsense, let's be real here, isn't what got the movie greenlit to begin with. This might be a controversial opinion, but if the FNAF movie is gonna pop off, I think it would have been best to just ignore everything that showed up after the third game. I feel like I've made my point clear on how I think the first 3 entries in the series tell a narratively satisfying trilogy of events. And while I know I'm not getting into depth about how sharp the turn into science fiction was, I don't exactly feel compelled to describe why a dude having his insides scooped out and replaced with a melted down conglomeration of 5 other spirit-possessed robots clashes with the simple setup of kids possessing animatronics after being murdered in a pizzeria. They're not exactly setting up the same tone, you know? Here's the thing though. In a post from 2017, Scott went on to say that the movie was essentially put back to square one and that he would be involved from day one this time. Alright? At this point, we had been given Sister Location and would go on to receive the second book as well as the Pizzeria Simulator game later that year. What once started out as a simple story about kids possessing animatronics after their unfortunate passing morphed into a story about a murderer who would go on to be killed himself and possess a springlock suit, to then a story about the murderer trying to bring his son and or daughter back after they died using life energy from the deceased, to a story about his son turning into a living corpse fueled by his desire to stop his dad, to then another story about the murderer's former business partner setting up a trap for all the animatronics that have a soul in it, and then burning it to the ground with the help of his nemesis zombie's son. And you know what? After saying it all out loud, no wonder Scott never just came out and told us, this is the story. Okay, let's wrap up with this. The movie is already made, right? And I'm gonna go see that shit with my fiance. This movie might ignore the games and totally suck, or it may be one of the best movies in a hot-ass minute and include all of the silly sci-fi nonsense. I have no idea, I haven't seen it, and I still can't wait to see it. But it's also no secret that Scott stepped down from leading the franchise. But he did not step down from guiding the movie adaptation. So the smart money is going to be that it is still going to play into all of the modern sensibilities of the franchise so far. The bright side, however, is that at the very least, they're going to have to lay out a concrete story for us to watch. And I personally have faith it's all going to work out. And since we're wrapping up here, I'm going to say this too. This is not a FNAF channel. I am certain there will be at least one more FNAF video following up on the release of the movie, but for now, that's all I'm looking at for the future as far as FNAF content goes. Don't worry, we're gonna get back to regular monsters and stuff too. The Digimon Adventure 02 movie is also dropping in November this year, and you can bet your ass I'm gonna cover that because Vmon and Davis are my favorite characters from that franchise, and I've been waiting for a decade for them to show back up. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Support me if you want. Every YouTuber on the planet has already told you how to do it. But for now, I'm bowing out, and I'll see you all next time.